Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our webinar series, Embracing Change. We've got Mark, whose, I guess, video's coming in a second. Hey, Mark, how are you doing?
Hello, everybody. Fine, thanks, Feisal. Good to be here.
Thanks for taking the time to be with us today and to share what's been going on in terms of the multifamily office space. As Deputy CEO of Stonehage Fleming, I'm sure that it's been a very interesting from a developmental perspective in terms of families and what they've been seeing and experiencing. So let's get right into it, if you don't mind. What are the biggest risks that you're seeing that families are facing at this moment in time or during this last 14 months? And how have you been able to help them mitigate or move through or support as they transition into what was to what is? So
well,
again,
great.
thank you, Mark.
Thank you. And it's good to be here with all of you from Geneva, where I'm actually in my office, which makes a nice change because I've been working from home, like most of you, on this webinar for over a year now. So I think, one of the things about the families is before I go into the risks, is what has COVID done in terms of their reflection? And there's been a lot of things that I think families have done. Firstly, they've had more time on their hands. There's been more thinking about mortality, capacity, as well as health. Feisal, and you and I have exchanged, a number of ideas around that concerning certain families. Succession planning and leadership. These are things that I think families have also started focusing on. And in essence, what does creating harmony look like? Before the pandemic, I think people very much caught up in their lives and their businesses and in that day to day. And having someone like us sit with them and challenge them on some of these things has always been something that I really appreciate and that our families appreciate too. And really looking at what their greatest risks are. So when you ask, what are their greatest risks? Most people assume, wealthy families assume that another 2008, a global financial crisis, is one of the greatest risks, or 2930 Great Depression. But really, when you look at it, and we've done a lot of research in this area as well as practical experience, some of the top 10 risks that families are facing. The first one is family disputes. In essence, that lack of proper communication. So yes, you may think that families are communicating, but they're not really communicating. It's communication through assimilation. So family disputes really are one of the top wealth desecrators that we as a business, and certainly me as an individual, having done this for 20 years, see. The second one would be a lack of planning, actually. So really looking at what is the foundation that family needs to make them successful. Challenging what the purpose of their wealth is. What is the wealth actually for? Yeah. And then creating a plan around that, the sort of building blocks that go on top of that. The next one I'd say, and very importantly, it brings in the next generation, is the failure to engage properly with that next generation. And when we've talked to a lot of our clients, we talk to both generations. It's interesting when you ask a question to the first generation and you ask the same question to the second generation, you're probably going to get a different answer. Yeah. In most cases. I think families that have done a lot of work around this, there's very much harmony around these sorts of things. So I think that failure to recognize that you need to engage with the next generation is a major risk. The fourth one I'd say is the lack of future family leadership and direction. So it's one thing whilst you're in the current generation of leadership, which is in essence, things continue as is. It's usually a patriarch or a matriarch, but actually what happens when one of those people is no longer here? How does the decision-making work? And really, again, engaging with that next generation to ask their views on what does this mean? And what does leadership actually mean? Is it the old style leadership, traditional leadership, where there's one person in charge calling the shots, or is it something different? And maybe we'll go into a bit more on leadership a bit later. Yeah. Another one is the failure to provide the next generation with appropriate training. I think a lot of the wealthy families that we work with are very good about, providing for their children's education, but I think it's a bit more than that. I think you need to go beyond that, and that obviously means some sort of mentoring program, beneficiary mentoring. So working with people like us to help them
Yeah.
and understand some of the things that they're going to face when their parents aren't here. Also working outside. So if you're in a family business, classically, some families just stick their children into the family business. Sometimes that's not a good idea, depending on the situation. And maybe it's better that they go outside and make some of their mistakes outside. So those, I mean, and you can see a lot of these things that I've just said, Feisal, are non-financial issues. But they will affect the financial capital of the family much later if they aren't dealt with properly. I'd say some of the others, now that this is more of the financial stuff, is ill-advised entrepreneurial investment. Having this non-coordinated approach to investing when everybody else, in essence, does their own thing. And I've seen situations where this can actually destroy the next generation in terms of destroying their confidence, for example.
Really?
And that really feeds on itself. Poor investment management's an obvious one, which most people put near the top, but actually it's not really the main reason, as I said to you earlier.
Yeah.
An increase in tax. I mean, I think that's becoming much more prevalent now. We are going through COVID. The Federal Reserves of most economies have a hot printing press. Someone's going to have to pay for this.
Yes.
And clearly the wealthy families are going to become more and more of a target. So even places like Hong Kong, where you sit, I've even had several inquiries from clients thinking about places to go to later because they are worried about tax increases, amongst other things, because there are various issues in Hong Kong, but there are various issues all over the world. And I do believe that tax will probably creep up that list. Look at wealth tax being discussed in the UK, for example. Where we live here in Switzerland, it's normal. We've had it for a long time, so we're used to it. Inheritance tax, capital gains tax, and you've seen it in South America, for example, where a government's levied a one-off tax just to pay for COVID. So I think one can expect this. I don't think this will be a major desecrator of family wealth, but I think it needs to be carefully managed. And obviously you need professionals to help you manage those things. The ninth one I'd say is political risk. And again, you're living in interesting times over there, Feisal. I'm originally from South Africa. I was brought up in South Africa. So I also lived through very interesting and dark times, actually. And there are a lot of our clients that live in places that have strong political risk. So it's, again, trying to manage that through diversification. Typically, families end up having children in different parts of the world, and that's sometimes part of a strategy as well. And I think lastly, and this isn't for every business family, it's also about the family business. And a number of our families that we work with have a family business at the core, at the center, which is also part of their purpose. And a failure of that can cause all sorts of issues. I mean, a great example of that actually is our main family, the Fleming family. As you know, we're called Stonehage Fleming.
Yes.
And the Fleming family are our only known client for obvious reasons. And in Asia, Fleming would have been very well known with, Jardine Fleming in those days. But, the Fleming family are in their 6th generation. And what used to, and this is what Matthew Fleming told me, who works for us in our London office. He said that the Fleming's business was part of the purpose. It's what kept the family together a lot. And of course, the business was sold in 2000. And that started making people question, so what's the purpose of this? And again, you have to put in safeguards and mitigate these sorts of things by having discussions amongst the family.
Yeah. So let's go step by step, if you don't mind. I mean, I know you gave a few examples, right? So let's go with the top, right, where you're saying the communication and all that. Do you feel that the communication during this time, because they've had more time, right, has improved? Or do you feel because of the inability to travel, because families are spread out in different places, it has actually, created even more of a complex situation in terms of having the family meetings, having the family council and investment meetings, whatever that they have, because, every family is structured differently, right? How have you found that? Because you've been working from home most of the time, and I know that most of us are frustrated because we can't travel, but so how is that coming along?
It's funny, if you'd asked me that question exactly a year ago, I'd give you a completely different answer. So a year ago, I was really worried. I thought us as a business, because we're very relationship driven, we would struggle. But actually, it was the exact opposite. We've engaged even more with many of our families now. Again, technology, you have to have a technology-enabled company or family office to be able to do this. And when you're dealing with multiple generations of a family where technology is something that's normal in a family, it's almost been quite seamless. We have all our trustee meetings, our family meetings. The good thing about it actually is they're kept quite concise because of this is the Zoom fatigue issue, but the engagement is still there. I would say that it's actually been quite positive for families. So families who thought, well, I'll see you at Christmas or I'll see you at Hanukkah, they don't think like that anymore. They just arrange a Zoom call with the family, with the advisors, and all the important issues are discussed. I mean, I had several situations where I do some work around the philosophy of wealth with patriarchs and matriarchs. In fact, some in Hong Kong. And I was always under the impression that this was a face-to-face exercise that would take a long time. So I experimented, and I said to these people, this is an experiment because I've never done this like this before, and it's worked really, really well. People are very engaged to share their secrets with you over a platform like this, and then build on it. And I think also people took the view after a few months that this pandemic was going to last longer than they thought. So you may as well get on with it.
So you feel they felt safer because of technology, because we're not physically in the room, or it's not that? It's just they just felt comfortable.
I don't think it's that. I mean, in terms of safety, I mean, there are two types of safety. There's psychological safety. And the fact is, whether you're in a room or in a room like we're all in with a whole lot of other people listening to us, they felt safe enough to be able to have these discussions, not in the room. The only one downside I saw is, I suppose, it's the ability to read body language from people. And that would be the one downside, I think, to all of this. But I think people would rather have these discussions, have open dialogue with their family and their advisors, and forego that issue than not do it at all.
Okay, so what were some of the topics, or what were the hot topics that were being addressed, without breaking confidentiality, of course, and that you did not see in the last few years that you got to see now, and you were pleasantly surprised in a good way, and maybe sometimes the other way?
I mean, quite a lot of discussion around social capital. So the issue of, well, we've made all this money, we've got all this wealth, this financial capital. What are we going to do with it? Who are we going to give some of it away? How are we going to give it away? Who's going to be involved? Who's going to make all those decisions? So there was a lot more around philanthropy. Now, part of it is because they really want to give their money away and their time, but also part of it is they want to be seen to be doing that. So there's a combination of two of those things. Because if you think about it, wealthy people these days are being vilified in certain jurisdictions for being wealthy. So giving money away and being seen to be giving money away is seen as a good thing or as a positive thing. So I'd say that came up quite a bit, or more than normal. Reputation management came up as quite an interesting topic. I mean, just take COVID, for example. Anybody who was seen as queue jumping the vaccine, depending on where you're in the world, would in theory get a bad reputation. So how do you as a family deal with a left field event like that? So I think the advent of social media, when you've got 3 generations of a family, for example, involved, having some sort of I wouldn't say rules, I'd say some sort of protocols around some of these things about what you really should and shouldn't do. And these are real finesse tweaking type arrangements. The normal stuff. So the investments were obviously discussed, and there was a big concern after March last year when the markets did what they did. But it was good to see families staying the course, not panicking. I think there was a bit more discussion about certain types of asset classes. Private equity, for example, has been talked about a lot more than it has in the past. Venture capital, accessing technology as well as an investment, I think was something that really came up. Funny enough, citizenship came up again. We haven't seen that for a while, but because I think the COVID has made people think, what is my safe place one day? And I'd never seen this, this concept before, where a family is willing to say, right, we don't feel that safe here, but there's a place that we do feel safe, and the whole family can gather at a moment's notice. So I did see a number of people look at situations like that and actually buy an asset in a certain country for that what-if scenario. So it wasn't about making a return. It was more having something just in case. And obviously the ability to be able to get there. So, passports were coming up for review as well. So we did have quite a few inquiries around that. The other interesting one was data. Where's our data? So if you think about it, people are quite concerned about where their data is. They tend to access websites and all sorts of things like this and apps without really thinking about it. And we've had a lot of families come to us and say, can you help us at least have a plan around this to know where our data is, and if something goes wrong, how do we deal with it? So what we can't do is necessarily fix every one of those things, but we can certainly come up and help them with a plan around that. So, there's even a new concept called doxing, Feisal. I'm sure you've probably read about it. And, it's almost like a form of blackmail for some of these people. And then the inevitable issue of tax. And again, it came up this morning with a client who's thinking way ahead for the jurisdiction that he lives in. He's very happy where he lives, but he's thinking, well, if things change here gradually, where shall I think about setting up something for my family some other time? Now, what I'm not saying is you should move because of tax, not at all. In fact, I encourage families to pay tax. You must pay your fair share of tax. But when it gets to the point where, and again, this is debatable, arguable, it's seen as unfair, sure, there's a good argument for that sort of thing. So I think a lot more thinking has gone around that. People have looked at possible restructures of their family situations. But I suppose the most important thing out of all of this was probably the succession planning aspects. If something happens to me, I'm in that airplane at 36,000 feet and I go down. Is everything okay? I mean, that's the binary question. And for some of them, they said, well, actually, no, it's not okay. And I need to do something about that. And I need to do it with people that I trust. So that's I was very pleased to see a lot more of those sorts of discussions, rather than can I earn a few more basis points on my cash, or should I have more of the fangs in my portfolio?
But
those are also important questions.
Yeah, but did they execute? Did they move through? Were they a lot more agile and adaptable than before? Were they really open to have that conversation? What if I don't wake up tomorrow? Okay, the plane crash is easier. Not waking up tomorrow is a different conversation, but okay. So just coming back for a second, one thing that I didn't hear is the reflection on how the government reacted or responded to COVID, and their reflection on rethinking where they're living and the jurisdiction they're in. Like that happened in Hong Kong, right? As we know, it wasn't just that, there was a lot of other factors that played with it, right? It all happened at the same time. So I didn't hear that as an issue. Is that didn't come up? Because a lot of governments responded poorly.
Listen, you're right. And I don't want to pinpoint which governments did or didn't.
Without the government. No. Yeah.
No, listen, I think some of the families, and that's part of why they came to the conclusion that they need to look for a safer place. I mean, that in essence is why. Because the people that came from those jurisdictions and asked me those sort of questions are the people that are living in jurisdictions where it was extremely poorly managed. They have absolutely no vaccination program. The hospitals weren't coping. The governments were very slow to react. And in some cases, some of the family did leave and go somewhere else, but in some cases they couldn't.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go back to the succession, right? So you're talking about succession. They're getting the house in order. Now let's talk about leadership, right? So do you see that there's more clarity on the succession? Is there more clarity on the person, or are you seeing more linear way of leadership versus hierarchical? Like what came through as you?
I suppose a few of the trends. I mean, there's no single answer to that question. I think some of the trends are the leaders are being chosen on merit, which is a good thing. So primogeniture is not necessarily the reason to have a leader. In fact, we did a mini survey and we saw that the trend dropping from close to a third down towards 10% over the next 3 years of of families that take that view that it must be the, the eldest son who,
Yeah.
takes over his family leaders, which is quite refreshing because,
Yeah.
the whole issue of gender equality, actually using the talent in your family the right way. I think families are really looking at that much more seriously than just assuming the status quo, because the last generation did it like this. That means that we have to do it like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good thing. There is much more open-mindedness on leadership. Families are willing to listen. I'm not saying in every jurisdiction, Feisal. So certainly where you're living, it's a more interesting conversation, put it that way.
Yeah.
So this is not a blank sheet of paper that I'm saying affects all families, but certainly a number of families that we work with are like that. I think one of the other trends that's coming is the next generation will be far more democratic in the case around leadership than the autocratic way that we've seen in the past. If I look at my 20 years here, a lot of the clients that we've worked with that have passed on were quite autocratic. It was just the way it was done, and decisions were made by them, and everybody else just had to follow. And it's interesting because working with that generation afterwards, it's not necessarily the case. So you almost seeing leadership change from one person to possibly several people, depending on the talent pool. So you take a family where philanthropy is a big part of what they do. There's probably someone in that family whose passion is philanthropy, and their knowledge is philanthropy. So they're in charge of that bit. There may be another person in that family who's very strong on the investment side. So the financial capital piece falls under them. So they lead on that. And then again, you may have another person in the family who has a natural ability to run the family business. So you can see there are almost three leaders in that scenario that I've just given you. And I think we are seeing more of that sort of thing. And again, it's coming together, those people coming together, discussing the issues, getting input, treating each other as equals, and then possibly rotating the chairmanship of that family council. So we are seeing a bit more of that sort of derivation rather than the old school, dad rules the roost, we do what dad says, which I think is in this day and age, I think is quite refreshing.
But even if it's one person ruling versus not, what about the whole concept of he's running or she's running the family business? That's where the most of the income is coming from. Mm-hmm. They have more power. You're seeing less of that now. They're just doing their part. Or are you still?
Again, it depends on the communication up front. And this is why I say to you at the beginning, before you put these things in place, you've got to talk about them. And this is why it's been very encouraging being able to work with families and I'm usually the one that's playing devil's advocate, throwing in these ideas or concepts of things that can go wrong, and using storytelling of other families to say, well, have you thought of this and have you thought of that? So as long as it's discussed up front and everybody has a say, then having a good facilitator to draw out these things, because sometimes people are a bit scared. They don't have the psychological safety to be able to really say. And we have ways of doing this. You have single interviews, and then you bring the family together. It's drawing it out. I think you have a much better chance, Feisal, because doing it like this isn't necessarily a guarantee of success. It's certainly going to get you a higher degree of probability of success, versus a family where nothing is discussed. The parents pass on, and then we'll see what happens. And in that case, chances are things will go wrong. So it's all about communication, understanding the purpose of why they're there, understanding what their shared values are. I mean, this is another huge piece of work that we do with families is bringing out those values. So it's fine to have different values within a family, but there's always something that's shared. And then what you do is you try and work with that, to try and work together.
I mean, look, one of the biggest challenges happening right now in China, right, is that values piece, right? Is that most of the next gen was educated overseas, including a lot of them schooling and university. They've come back. They don't want to join the traditional family business. They want to do a lot of the stuff that you talked about, the VC, the PE, and all those things. And I want to talk about the communication bit, right? That communication between generations. And you're saying that you're having more success than before in that, right? And is the older gen able to understand the mindset, right? Because in China, it's really a challenge because they it's a lot of old traditional economy money, right? And the other day we were talking to Dana, and the whole concept of this money is not clean, right? Because it's pharma, or it's coal, or in China they can be mining, all kinds of things. So is that coming up, or that's just a minor element?
Listen, I think with all of these things, it has to start somewhere. Okay, so the realization that you need to have a discussion because that there's something that a scratch, something that an itch you need to scratch. It's always the first step, but then it's getting someone who has done this with other families to draw it out.
Okay.
Because in most cases, most people don't know they even need this exercise.
Yeah.
Okay. And once you start it, you start with a few rhetorical questions. These people just don't stop talking. It's very interesting. So you may plan a 1.5 hour meeting, Feisal, turns into a 3 hour meeting.
Yeah.
And then they want to have another one and another one because they've got so much to get off their chests. Because
Yeah.
they realize it's their responsibility to have to do this. The other thing is, I think that, the smart families have also realized that the world has changed. Everything has changed so quickly. Just to build a business these days is shorter than it used to be, for example. The expertise needed, some of these patriarchs and matriarchs don't even have, but yet the next generation does. So I think they recognize some of these things. Okay. So I think they are, and of course, as you say, the children are educated in different parts of the world. So the cultures are now mixing. And it's almost like a melting pot. And I think for some parents who old school, it's very difficult. But I think the way to really start that conversation is to get someone who's a good facilitator to really sow the seeds of doubt in their heads that things need to change. And then from there, it gets much easier.
Okay. There was a question that came up. We can address it in terms of reputation risk, right? In terms of this whole social media bit, and how do you manage that with the next gen, right? Are there any specific ideas or mechanisms that you're putting into place for the next gen? I don't want to make that specific, but if there's anything you guys are doing that.
Well, again, I think the first thing is to make the next generation realize what the downside of this whole thing is. So again, if you have a good family council type setting where you have open discussions and things like this are put on the agenda, then you can at least talk about these things. Because I think imposing these rules on the next gen just won't work. So what we've learned is imposition of a rule probably won't work. It has to be something where, and this is what I talk about, democracy versus autocracy.
Yeah.
If you tell them the stories of some of the horror stories of families where social media was used in the wrong way and how it's affected the family business, or the secrecy of something relating to the family, it makes them think twice. So they come to their own realization. So just saying, okay, here's the policy, abide by the policy, or you won't get a distribution next year, it doesn't really work. Okay, they're just going to do it anyway. Or putting some sort of technological shortcut on their phone won't work either. It has to be something where you make them see sense, and you make them see that this could create long-term damage to their own family, which chances are they're going to lead one day anyway. And I think that's the way to do it.
Okay. Now going back to the succession bit, right? We're all, many are living much longer than before. So are you seeing that being stretched, or do you feel refreshed that it's not necessarily being stretched, and the older CEOs are going more into the advisory piece and moving on?
When you say that, I had a meeting with a person who wants to become a client last week, and he's in his late 60s, and he still wants to work, but he knows that he wants the next generation involved as soon as possible. So he doesn't want to get to 80 and then starts thinking about it. So his view is, late 60s is the right time. I think for different families, it's different. I've seen families where it's earlier, and I've seen families where it hasn't even started and the people are in their 80s. So there's no global trend to say that people are starting earlier. I agree that people are living longer. What I am seeing though is these people that are currently leading their families are bringing their families together earlier,
Okay.
And it's almost like a trial run for that what if scenario.
Okay.
I mean, a great example of this, if I can tell a story, Feisal, was
Yeah, please.
back in 2007. I was sitting with the patriarch and his family in London at a family meeting, and he announced to all of us, and I was chairing the meeting, he announced to us that next year was the Beijing Olympics, and that he wanted to go to the Olympics, and the family meeting always was at the exact time, took place at the same time. So he said he was going to the Olympics, and he wanted the meeting to go ahead without him as a practice run for when he was no longer around.
And he literally
And the family were horrified,
words.
but he did it. That's exactly what he says. He said, "I want a practice
Wow.
run for when I'm dead." And it was quite a bizarre request, but we went along with it. And I remember, a year later when we were holding the meeting, I had to make an introductory speech about the patriarch enjoying the 100-meter final while we were having the meeting. But I think people opened up in a slightly different way than they usually did. So that sort of practice that we'd had up until that point was really good practice. Yeah. And the person died about 5 years later, and it was absolutely seamless. And to this day, we have those family meetings twice a year. So I think that's just one example, but there are a number of examples where families have been brought in earlier. I mean, there's situations that we've had to deal with where we've had to bring in kids earlier because parents get sick. We had a situation of a client who passed away at the age of 50 of cancer, and his, two of his boys we had to bring in to help us run the philanthropic pot, and it was agreed that was going to be their training for the day that they move to the family council for the family pot. And that was something that was almost forced upon us. So you get different scenarios, but we had talked long before we knew he was going to get sick, that his kids had great values, that we could probably bring them in at an early age, that the wealth wasn't necessarily going to change them like it may change other families. But we were forced into a situation where we had to expedite that.
I heard you say something in the beginning. I want to switch gears a bit on the entrepreneurship side, and sometimes it breaks people's confidence. Can you elaborate on that? Because I have a entrepreneurship fund for the kids. I like to understand, not about making about me, but I want to understand that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, again, every family is different, and only your own kids, right? And you know what they're capable of because you've brought them up, and you've instilled your values and your wife's values in your family. I've seen a number of scenarios where that didn't really happen very well, and because the parents were so busy building businesses that the kids were left to their own devices, and they got money too early, the old story, and then because they have a name, a famous name, for example, or a well-known name in business circles, people assume that they were as good as their parents. And because the money was available, they would try and emulate their parents, and 90% of the cases they would fail. So what would happen, and I saw this in several families, early on they'd be making these investments with, in essence, the parents' money from the trustees. It would fail, but then after a while they would stop making investments. And I asked them, I said, so what's your thinking? And I'd get the same response, which is, I've got no confidence. I've got absolutely no confidence to invest now. I have become a beneficiary. I haven't become someone who's going to grow the family wealth. I'm just there to consume, and it really breaks these people. The concept of self-respect it goes out the window. So again, I think this is a lesson for a lot of the patriarchs and the matriarchs in terms of bringing their children up. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy; you've still got the same job to do that people who aren't wealthy have.
Okay, so this is investment. Now, these are not people who started companies, right? These are just
these are usually investments where they aren't starting the company themselves. They are going in as partners with other people.
Okay.
Just as an example, yeah.
And what about entrepreneurship? I mean, are you seeing more and more families bringing in that element to really support the next gen to try different things so that they can expand and grow and diversify, or not much of that?
I'm not seeing as much as you might expect. I think what the good thing is, I think we are seeing parents let their kids fly and again get well educated.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of families where things are going really well. In fact, they don't need the family wealth because the kids are doing well themselves. They're going into their own businesses. They are starting businesses. So there is, I wouldn't say there's a complete trend with all of these wealthy kids, because for every good situation, there's always a bad example of a kid that in essence just becomes a beneficiary rather than a custodian of wealth or someone who's going to build the family wealth. There are exceptions to that rule, though. I think, and I can't tell you, I can't give you a trend that says it's this sort of person or that sort of person. It's really a mixed bag. But what does help is, it goes back to how have you brought your children up? How have they perceived the wealth? What is the value of money? What is the value of philanthropy? What binds the family together? What does hard work look like? And I think if you get those things right, there's a better chance that your child could be successful in some shape or form. And part of that may be financial success.
Okay, now in terms of, and you're talking about this is the family risk. What about as a family office? What are the risks that you're seeing that maybe were not present 14 months ago? Are you seeing anything that's keeping you up at night, or just having you reflect
from a family office point of view? So I think there are some big risks for family offices. Firstly, there are a lot of family offices being created. Certainly in Asia, in Singapore, Hong Kong, and other places, they're like mushrooms. They're just spreading up everywhere, Feisal. And probably the most family offices in the world now, in terms of growth, are happening in your part of the world. Certainly here, it's a bit quieter, but it is happening. So I think the biggest risks facing proper family offices, real family offices as opposed to pretend family offices, because there are a lot of those, is not engaging with the next generation. So if you think about what does that actually mean? So you've got a successful business dealing with that generation of the family. They like you, they trust you, they do business with you, you're in the inner sanctum. And if you don't engage with the next generation, guess what? They're probably going to kick you out. Because what we're seeing is the next generation's generally not as loyal. They don't like paying fees. They want to see you on a screen, not in real life. And they want to pay lots of tax. So this is the opposite to all of their parents, in essence. So you as a family office have to work out ways of becoming relevant to the next generation. And that may be you hire certain types of people that can talk the same language as these people. I don't mean literally the same language. I just mean that understanding. So putting your oldest senior partner to meet the young member of the family, that's just not going to work, right? So you've got to think of novel ways of dealing that risk. I think another risk is not investing in technology. COVID's just shown that if you're a multi-family office that is old school with a wood paneling and a computer that no one ever uses, you will fail. Certainly that next generation point, absolutely, that next generation point where they will look and say, well, the way I perceive you from an IT point of view is the way I perceive you. So unless that's good and cutting edge, I'm not going to use you. So I think that's a problem. The other thing is those people are trying to commoditize everything. So every service is almost being commoditized now. So if you're a really good family office and you want to be, the sort of Bain, McKinsey, BCG of the family advisory industry, you can't be commoditized. You have to work out your value proposition with that family and be seen as the go-to people that they deal with for all the really important decisions in their lives. I think that's really the key. And one thing I always ask people, clients, is what do you call us to your friends? Right? Think about it. So if they call us their accountant, we've done a bad job, or their tax advisor, bad job, or their administrator, bad job. Can you see? If they call us their trusted advisor, their consigliere, their trustee, that elevates you to a different position. You see, so it's really up to the family office to make itself relevant to the family by giving it really, really good advice. The other thing, there are two other things to finish off on this point. One is obviously cost. The pressure is downwards. It's a bit like the investment business these days. The pressure on margins is down. It's the same with running a family office. It's all about having the right platforms, and that's why a lot of these single family offices, I think, struggle, because they don't have the scale and they don't have the platform. So they end up missing half of the risks, which doesn't do the family any good. So having a really good platform covering all the risks, bringing down the cost of sales to the client is also really important. I think if you hit all of those points, you will be successful, because, I mean, again, last point on this is there's more and more wealth being created, and more and more families out there becoming wealthier. And you know, you've read the FT and other publications. A lot of families did really well during the COVID period, and someone has to help them manage all of that.
So that means you're saying basically the requirement to run a family office properly has gone up exponentially compared to before.
It does, yeah, it has.
The number used to be about $100. Is that number now much higher to be able to pull it off? Or it's not the number, it's more the mindset and what you're ready to invest in?
It is the mindset. Again, there are a lot of variables here in terms of where you do it, you know, how many people you have, what sort of systems you have. But what is also changing, I didn't touch on it earlier, is regulation.
Yeah.
Because the governments are imposing all of these things on family offices now. Before, because up until recently, you know, family offices in essence could do what they wanted. They weren't regulated, unlike, you know, a pure investment business and certain trust businesses. So that's more and more and more of that's coming, which will increase the cost, unfortunately, because someone has to pay for that. So that's why you know, having a good platform, being able to scale is so important, because the client doesn't necessarily accept all of these increased costs. So you have to be efficient somewhere.
So in terms of opening a family office, do people come to you, even though obviously you're a multi-family office? Do you advise on that and help them build it out and work with them so that you know, it's more efficient than just being independent on its own? Yeah.
I mean, some of our best clients are actually single family offices. So, you know, we're actually talking the same language to each other.
Okay.
Because, you know, if you're big enough in terms of your overall wealth and complexity, because again, family will be all over the world, it's a good idea to have some sort of setup yourself, which works with professionals in a multi-family office setting. Because what you'll find is if you try and do everything yourself, Feisal, you'll probably fail, because it's very difficult unless you're spending huge amounts of money to have all of that expertise in-house, plus the platforms, etc. So what we do is we work with families. So if someone comes to us with absolutely no infrastructure whatsoever, and they are of a certain wealth, we will actually recommend that they look to hire a right-hand person that we can deal with. Because most of these patriarchs, matriarchs don't really want to deal with this stuff, because they want to do other things. You know, it's all about saving them time and helping them avoid, you know, the bad mistakes that other families have made. They're not really interested in the detail. They want to leave that to others.
So, I mean, we talked about this when we spent some time together in Switzerland, in terms of bringing on board people to work with you, to be able to connect, right? Are you seeing that level of requirement of or what's needed has changed? And how are you, you know, how is that coming for you?
I remember we discussed this at Vila at your place. And it's such an important point, because finding the right people to do this properly is really difficult. Really difficult. I mean, there's a high degree of IQ and EQ, and it's the connection with the family where they really trust you. You know, they take it for granted that you've got the technical expertise. So that's almost the easy part. But it's the ability to connect with these people at the right level, to understand what they want, to understand what they need. Sometimes before they even know what they need and understand. That's the really hard part. So finding those people, it's sometimes a leap of faith, and sometimes it doesn't work out. But when you find people in your organization like that, they are worth gold. So the connection, where if I look at some of the families that we deal with and the lead client relationship people that deal with them, really good ones, they're almost part of that family. And you know, one of my challenges actually as someone who's running a big part of the business is, how do I keep those people actually? Because what's stopping the family just taking that person and having them themselves? But that means they're doing a very good job. So again, if it comes back to my point earlier, which is what do they call you? What does a family call you to someone else? And it's really an acid test.
That was really funny. I was speaking at a, CEO conference, which is after YPO, and one of the families introduced me to somebody I didn't know, and said, "Oh, this is my psychiatrist." And I was like, "What?" And I almost fell off my chair. And he's like, "Yeah, this
Well,
is
you
our
could
family
be.
psychologist." He said, he helps us, he helps us stay in check, so that we don't fall apart. But it was just interesting when you're saying that. I just remembered, and I'll be asking people, what do they call you, and let's see
What do they call you? But it's it's very interesting. A situation. I had a situation the other day where when a client called me about his daughter, because he wants his daughter to move to London from a certain country, and the employer is not letting her go. Can I help? So I got involved. But because he trusts me, and I know his daughter. I've known his family for 20 years. But you wouldn't call your private banker to do that. Probably not. I guess not, or someone who's just running your assets. So you work yourself into a position rightly, because it's all about building trust, to do the right thing and help them when they really need you. And that's the connection point. And this is why I say, true family office is going to have people that are able to do that, rather than a commodity.
Yeah. So let's go into a little bit of advisory, some free advice, Mark. Okay. So tell me, what would be the 3 or 5 things that you would recommend or advise to, let's say, the patriarchs or matriarchs, and then let's go to the next gen, and maybe the heads of the family office. We have a number of people from wearing different hats on the call with us today.
I'd go down to the foundation piece, okay, which is understand the purpose of your wealth. Ask yourself the question, what is it for? And if you can answer it easily, good for you. If you can't, well, you've got some work to do.
Okay.
I think you need to understand, define what happiness and success means to you as a family. And I think because this is really high level for philosophical stuff for matriarchs and patriarchs, because they all know how to make money and they all know how to run businesses. So I'm not going to give them any advice around that. But what I'm trying to do is trying to get them to think about the future when they're not here, and what does that actually mean? I think that's the one thing, and recognizing that they need to communicate, that they need to listen to their children, actually, rather than impose something on their children. And it's quite hard, because most of these people are A-type personalities. They're used to getting their own way. They're very smart. But when it comes to their own children, not as smart as you think. And they need to be able to deal with people that can tell them this, rather than people that just tell them what they want to hear. So I'd say be open to that sort of dialogue. And if you get that right, I think you've got a huge chance to create some sort of legacy. Again, that if that's what you want. So that's what I'd say to the matriarchs and the patriarchs. What would I say to the next gen? Yeah. First thing I'd say is be patient, because I'm talking to your parents. And then I'd say, tell them what you think. Tell them what you think when these sort of questions come up. Tell them, work with them. Work with you.
Have a voice, because when we work with the next gen, we coach them that their voice matters. That even if they're 16 or 20 or 25. So is someone on your team coaching them that their voice matters? That
we are absolutely coaching them, and this is why I said you've got to have that connection with the next generation to be able to get them to do that. But we are telling them, that it's an opportunity, it's a burden, and it's a responsibility, actually. So it's time. Again, I'm not going to give you an age limit at this stage, but you sort of know when it's time to have those sort of discussions. And interesting, the families that I've dealt with, the kids always want to do this. They don't see this as a bind, something that they don't have to do. We had 1 or 2 exceptions to that, but they all want to do this, and I think they find it quite a useful is not the right word. It's almost cathartic in a way sometimes, that their parents are willing to open up, and that they're willing to can actually say what they think. And what you inevitably find is that the parents learn something about their own children.
Yeah.
I mean, I had this one situation with a family where I remember saying, so what are we going to do with the wealth vis-a-vis the children? And you had the mother was sitting on that side of the couch and the father was on the other. And the father said, I'm giving it all to charity. And the mother says, no, it's all going to the kids. So I said, well, we've got some work to do. Right. So, but at least, you've got to start somewhere. And then we ended at a place we wanted to end up with the kids involved, which I thought was a very good process to go through. So I think that, these are quite philosophical things. I mean, the other thing, obviously, I'd say to the kids is, get the best education you possibly can and learn as much as you possibly can from your parents. Because a lot of these clients that we have are very smart business people, and they've got a lot to give to teach their children. And it's just ensuring that happens whilst they're still alive.
I encourage everyone to use the chat box in the Q&A to ask questions. I mean, there's a number of you from all walks in terms of approach. So I'm going to ask you now, Mark, while we wait for some questions to come in, what would you do that without getting yourself in trouble? I know you're deputy CEO, so you're not really in trouble, but what would you love to do that you're still not able to do because, you are in the position you're in terms of really being of service to the families? Or maybe what you would love the families to do that they're not still waking up and doing. Whichever, I know you'll choose the latter as a safer one, but I hope you'll entertain both. Like what's missing that you feel that that would be just a dream that you could provide?
That I could provide? That's a really hard question.
Well, you're deputy CEO.
I mean, I think what we give the families is an all-encompassing service. We're very open and honest with them. I think maybe what I would like is that everybody's honest with them. I sometimes think there are pockets within our industry of people that aren't as honest as they should be. And I think, unfortunately, that doesn't do anybody any favors. So I think being really honest with these people, saying, just listen to me. I know more than you because I've been doing this for a long time and you haven't. You've been doing your own business. So trust me on this. I know, and I can give you lots of stories as to why I'm right and you're wrong. So I think not enough people say that. And therefore you will still find families that have disastrous situations and end up in court talking through lawyers, and children that really end up where they shouldn't end up. So I think a bit more honesty. I mean, in my case, it's fine. I'm pretty honest with everybody. I just tell them what I think because I think that's the best way to be. Honesty is the best policy when you're dealing with people. But it only happens later in your career, Feisal. I mean, this is the first thing I always say. When you do this sort of business, the first 5 years you actually know nothing. Just keep quiet and listen, because you'll learn things from families.
Yeah.
And then you'll start turning it on its head, and then you'll start sharing some of the wisdom that you've got from families and sharing them with other families. I always think that's a really good thing to do, to be able to bring the wisdom, the practical wisdom from one family and share it with another family. Because a lot of these people have very similar issues, problems.
So, and in terms of, so honesty, so basically, and what about the crutch part? Do you feel, I mean, one of the key elements in for us, one of the values is empowerment, right? That our whole objective is to empower, right? Transform family by empowering them, right? So do you feel that there's still this element of players, I mean, people in your space that are creating crutches so that there's dependency and not enough empowerment?
Yeah, there is definitely that. Some people will see a family office as somewhere where they're going to get their cash from, rather than someone who's actually going to give them good advice on how to deal with all of these risks that I spoke about earlier. And that's more an administrative thing. So I do think there are a lot of organizations out there that still have that problem. And I think that hopefully will change over time. And hopefully families will also learn that they need much more from their family offices than just an administrative service.
So here somebody's coming in saying, what form of decision-making process is most effective amongst a family of siblings with no matriarch or patriarch? equal vote, shareholding, majority, supermajority? Well, that's getting into detail, but why don't you give it a shot, Mark? I know you
Again, I
can't be
think
general, but just
I think what would help is obviously the parents were there at some stage, but is a discussion around with the parents present before what's important to them. So I always think when you start getting into the detail around voting, it starts becoming a little bit dangerous because things can go wrong and then it creates animosity. In fact, I had one client, I remember in his letter of wishes, he always said, if it gets down, he doesn't want winners and losers. And I remember thinking that was quite a good way of putting it. So it has to be a unanimous decision if it is that sort of decision. So I think having a voting situation is quite difficult. But I think what you need to do is you need to talk through all the possible things that can go wrong. I mean, a good example is whether in that example of the 3 children or 4 children, whether spouses should be included in any decision making or any family meetings or not. And again, I think that's something that should be discussed way before you get to the point they're at now and you come to your conclusion.
Yeah.
So I think, what I always think that the philosophy document is far better than the family constitution document, which is more a set of rules.
Yeah.
Because then, a set of rules means someone's going to interpret that rule and then say, well, let's go to court. I think that's dangerous. Whereas the philosophy that the family signs up to is a set of principles that are there forever, and everybody agrees on the principles. So therefore, when you have a difficult situation, just take it back to the basic principles, the 10 Commandments type thing, rather than what exactly did that legal word mean in my family constitution. So this is why, when you say we're getting into the weeds, I think we are getting into the weeds, and that's not necessarily the right answer.
Yeah.
Again, every situation is different. So we'd have to look at it on its merits. But I think principles and philosophy over that sort of detail.
Yeah. So you talked about letter of wishes. I mean, are you encouraging more and more people share the letter of wishes while they're alive rather than wait for later?
I am, yes.
And is that happening?
I think
that's what we're doing a lot.
It is. Transparency. Again, I think transparency, communication, much better than kids finding out later, what's the family worth?
Yeah.
Who's getting what?
Yeah.
Is this a legacy that's being created, or is it being split in different pots? Is the person who runs the business getting more? If so, why? I think you have to discuss all of that stuff up front, Feisal, so that people understand it and they can debate it. If I look at some of the most successful families I work with, they've all had these discussions, so that when the generation passes on, it's seamless. And yes, someone gets more, but it's been agreed.
Yeah. And we all knew. Yeah.
So I'm a big proponent of transparency. So having a letter of wishes that is discussed, I think, is a good idea.
Perfect. So we've got here, how do you deal with the younger generation member who has severe sense of self-entitlement, which clearly upsets other family members?
Yes. I mean, this is the issue of fairness over equality. I mean, I think most families are going to have a situation where, others are more capable, for example. And again, capable could mean different things to different people. So I think you have to treat every situation on its merits. I think, some form of training, mentorship, bringing in someone like us to at least try and talk to this child.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen this before, by the way, and you can't always solve these sorts of problems. Sometimes it's just too late because the damage has been done. But you have to try. There's no silver bullet to this one. I think if you start early to try and avoid it, great. If you get to a situation where you've tried everything and it just doesn't work, well, I mean, I think you have to accept it. And obviously there are ways of managing that situation later in life. You have your trusts, for example. You have your trustees who understand that someone like that, has to be dealt with in a certain way, that they can't just get access, they can't just take money and invest it, et cetera, et cetera. There are a whole lot of ways of managing that process. So there are two things. Either you cure it or you just manage it. And I think each one of those scenarios will have different answers.
Okay. We've got here just a last question before we ask you to make some closing remarks. What would a well-educated MBA family office graduate look like to you?
So it doesn't have to be an MBA, by the way.
This person.
So listen, we like to hire people who've been out into the real world and had some experience.
Yeah.
You know, 5 or 6 years experience in maybe one of the big cities and one of the big institutions.
Yeah.
They almost know what they don't want. So working in a big financial institution, for example, like myself, I worked for a bank, 20 something years ago, and I realized I didn't want to work for a big bank. So working in a smaller environment where you're directly working with the family. So I think it's someone who knows what they don't want to then know what they want is a good start. So getting someone fresh out of an MBA, that isn't necessarily the right answer, because the chances are they would want to work for you and then go somewhere else. When you're working in a family office, it's a very personalized type business. You're working with families, you're growing with these families, and these families don't really like change. So it's chances are we would hire some MBA students once in a while, but it wouldn't be our main recruitment policy.
Okay. All right, Mark, we're past the hour mark. As I told you, it's going to fly.
Went so quickly.
Yep, exactly. So before we say goodbye to the families that we all care for, any closing remarks, questions you want to leave them with? Just maybe some introspection, reflection, so that they can maybe choose differently.
Sure. Well, firstly, thanks for listening to me. I really appreciate it. And Feisal, thank you for asking me to come on to talk. I mean, I'm very, very passionate about working with families. I love it. And I think, people that work in this business need to be passionate about working with families and trying to help them. Because I think that if you do it properly, if you do it well, you can actually make a lasting difference on these people. It's a bit like my wife, who's a doctor. I always used to think that she has a more meaningful role than I do, but in a way, mine is slightly different, but it does have meaning to it. So I think, for people coming into this business, look for something like that. It's about being close to these people, being valuable to these people, and valued by these people, and giving them honest advice based on your experience. I think the one incredible thing that we have, or privilege that we have, Feisal, is that we've learned from so many other families as to what you should and shouldn't do, and it's just literally it's passing on that experience to the families that you work with. And I think that it's something that I feel very privileged to do on a daily basis. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thank you for your time. Thank you, everyone. We're going to be speaking next week. Kim Barta is going to come in and talk about how the ego is part of the leadership process and what does that mean. Then we'll have Philip Markovici. I'm sure, Mark, I know you know him very well. He's going to come in and talk about wealth and the elements of the business and how the pandemic has impacted them. And then we're going to have Dominic coming in talking about governance and how culture and narratives impact governance. So we had a number of women in a row. Now we've got a number of men in a row. So it's going to be an interesting next coming 4 to 5 weeks. So thank you again, Mark. Thank you very much for taking time. Thank you, everyone, for being here, and we see you next week. All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.